This is the Experience Podcast, episode number 1. My name is Neil Miller. I am here with Dennis Miller and Nadim. I'll pass it on to you, Dennis.
So, this podcast, our core values are based on facts, because that's the core value number 1 that we have. And the reason that we chose that is because nowadays we live in a society that everything is pretty much opposite of facts. It's not real for the most part. You guys want to elaborate on that core value?
Of facts?
Yes.
For me, it represents just the core essence of what is reality, as far as it is. The facts cannot be, the facts are facts, like they do not change. That's what I have to say on that. Anything, Nadim?
Just as in truth is always truth.
Awesome. And then the second core value of the podcast is inspiration. What our goal is we want to inspire you guys, the listeners, to create positive change in your life. And also the third one, core value, is empowerment, and the fourth one is transformation. So I'll give it back to you now.
So, as far as, could you say the last core value again, just so for our listeners?
Transformation.
Transformation. So, transformation can be very small and it can be very big. And it depends on your journey and where you're at. It can be as small as paying for someone's lunch. That is a transformation from your old self deciding to spend that money on something else. It's a small transformation, but it is a transformation. I just want to talk about that. Do you have anything to add on the word transformation? How you feel about it? Could you add anything to that?
I just feel like transformation comes with growth. As we learn more, as we go through more things that alter our path and different patterns that we had been stuck in, it allows us to transform and grow and move forward.
Sure.
And going back to what you were saying, is it can be as simple as holding the door open for somebody, because they may not have been having a good day, and by you doing that without you even realizing it, you're affecting that person's day, so it causes a ripple effect. So like you were saying, the smallest thing can be the biggest thing. Yeah, it's huge.
It's about taking the time to be present and just fully in the moment, to where you'll be able to see and recognize those moments where you can add value to someone else's life, which is a transformation in you as a person at that point. It's no longer about the other person. You're doing it for them, for yourself.
Yes. So I want to ask, or this is kind of changing the direction here a little bit. But I want to ask our guest, Nadim, one of the things that's we're going to talk a lot about in this podcast and in future podcasts is consciousness. How do you explain consciousness?
I explain consciousness with awareness. As we become more conscious of things, or as we become more aware of things, it allows us to open our mind and other things that we may have not seen before. It allows us to change our perspective and even see things for what they are instead of the different lies we've learned or things that were not just right, ways of teaching, for instance, that kind of halted our growth or our expansion of awareness.
Okay.
So you're linking awareness to consciousness. Your thought of it is it's consciousness is more of the awareness aspect of it.
Yes, I mean, there's several parts of it, but I feel like that's a large part of it.
That's interesting.
You mentioned teaching or things that we've been taught, like how is that related to how is that related to consciousness?
In the sense of maybe different perspectives or different views of the world that our parents had that they put upon us without truly realizing that they were not correct, or that they actually pulled us more away from consciousness or being able to connect with other people that we normally wouldn't have, just based off of things that we were taught as children, such as certain prejudices or even racism that I think separates all people from coming together.
Things that got basically passed down.
Yeah, from our parents. Or
So how do we end that cycle? How do we end the cycle of things getting passed down? Like,
truly becoming aware of those faults and flaws in the things we were taught, or in our upbringing.
so what can you tell our listeners that, like, if they're on this path of maybe they feel that they want to change the trajectory that they're on. How do you if that makes
Really thinking before you act. I think a lot of times people they react strictly off of action or actions of another person instead of actually thinking about what it's going to do for them there, or how much it's going to halt their growth or their development by allowing anger or resentment or any of those things in to kind of poison your view or cloud your view.
There was a key word that you mentioned there of reaction. When you react to somebody, you are reacting basing yourself on how they made you feel. So it's more of a, not a reaction, but more of a coming from a place of knowing who you are. So you're not reacting, but you're responding to the person that is talking to you.
Yeah.
So at that point, it's not a reaction anymore, it's a response. When you react, external circumstances control your internal conditions. When you respond, the external conditions do not matter because your internal condition is already where it needs to be at. And that is, I wanted to point that out as far as responding to somebody instead of reacting to somebody. There's a difference there, and it's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You also mentioned the smallest things, and Neil, you were just talking about the other day how if you do the hard work, and it ties in with what you were saying. I asked you about the what our listeners can do, but you mentioned the fact that if you do the hard things, your life becomes easy.
And if you do the easy things, you're gonna still have to do the hard things because it's a yin and yang, it's a black and white, it's a boy and girl. it just ties into that aspect of it. So I have a note here. It's just as you breathe in and out, there is a time for being ahead, there is a time for being behind, there's a time for being in motion, and a time for being at rest. There's a time for being vigorous, and there is a time for being exhausted. There's a time for being safe, and there is a time for being in danger. Do you have something to add to that?
No, I think that's good.
There is a time for everything, and that time is when that thing happens.
I think that's
I
also
like it.
goes with pain and pleasure. I mean, it goes in either direction. In order to understand great pleasure, you have to understand great pain, and vice versa. You go on opposite sides of the spectrum to feel opposite sides of the spectrum. And the deeper you go on either side, the deeper you can go on the opposite side, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and we can look at it like we look at a tree. When we look at a tree, you see above the ground, you see the trunk, and you see the branches, and you see the bark, and you see the leaves. And what you don't see is below the ground, there's another tree. Growing downward, there is a whole nother trunk, a whole nother root system, a whole nother smaller root system. It's a tree in the opposite direction, below the ground. And it is the duality of the universe.
Yes, absolutely.
We can go on with these statements. So there is the thing you were talking about as far as awareness. So in the Tao Te Ching, they say that truly the best governor governs least. What do you make of that statement? And do you have anything to add to that? What is your take on that?
It almost sounds that it's talking about just focusing on your own path. In a sense, I mean, that's what I pulled from that statement. And allowing everything else to fall into place, because everyone else and everything else has its own path as well.
Yes.
So it's like, even though this is my reality, this is also your reality and your reality. We're just different players of the same board. I mean, and at times we come to the same level and we still communicate, but we are still at different parts and have different worlds, in a sense. Like, we're still masters of our own world, but just different parts of the same world. I think is what.
Different parts of the same world.
There's different parts of the same reality.
Okay.
What do you make of that statement? And do you want me to read it again? I can read it again.
I'd like to elaborate on the different parts of the same reality.
Write that down and we'll come back to that. So truly the best governor governs least. What do you make of that statement? And how do you feel about that? And just what's your take on it?
Yeah, I think that that's a governor that has found inner peace and is leading by example, by being the light. because he's walking the walk. And by doing that, other people will want to do the same thing. So that, going back to what was the
Truly the best governor governs least.
yeah.
So by you're saying by governing, by being himself, by not imposing himself on others, I think is a correct word to use. He became the best governor because he was governing the least. And I feel like that could also be talking directly about thoughts. When you try to govern your thoughts will drive you crazy. When you let go of your thoughts they cease and you're at peace. So talking about the governor, he is not governing his thoughts, therefore he is the best governor.
Wow.
So I have another one here. So there's this thing about materialism. We live in a world of material things, material everything. How do you feel about the material things? About that aspect of society?
Well, I think if we keep on going this direction, I think that it'll lead to human extinction. Because, I mean, all you gotta do is step outside and walk around. I mean, look at all the trees that we've killed. Look at all the, the forests that are no longer here. The CO2, like and if we keep on, and we're destroying the earth in order to feed the materialism.
I like that. I like how you stated that. We're using the materials to make material things to make ourselves feel better or make ourselves look better. With that materialism, when you realize that you're enough, then you truly become rich.
I feel like materialism also leads people to use people instead of the very things that they're chasing. Like people are chasing it too far and completely lacking human connection, and it's deteriorating any kind of human connection because a lot of individuals' desires are completely out of whack. So when I think materialism and stuff, I think it's bad for that reason, not necessarily that. I mean, at least for me personally, about just overusing resources, because that's always been happening. But as far as separating everyone more and more and more and more, because most of our conversations are now through cell phones. There's not actual face connection. I mean, FaceTime, person to person, and it kind of lacks empathy in text messaging as well.
Why is face-to-face, person-to-person contact important?
Because you can feel the individual and what they mean instead of just trying to go off of your own ideas. Like there's no emotion behind any of the conversations that we have during text. So when we have to confront people, our confrontation is also all out of whack. We also say things that we normally wouldn't say to the person's face, even hurting our relationships or everything at a way deeper level than we would have. So I think it leads into that too, is it's leading into people using people and not things.
So you mentioned they are, they being people are chasing, materials and not chasing the things they want. What do people want, Nadim?
I mean, I think it's honestly soul connection, like real connection, and since a lot of people have lacked that for much of their life, they're not really sure of those needs or of those desires 100% because everything's came into like false gratification or false validation or any of those things through social media, through any of these other outlets.
Mm-hmm.
Is we're looking for everything that's temporary, not looking for anything that is actually knowledge or something that we can use in our everyday life.
Do you have anything
So,
to add?
are you saying that it's basically we're getting our dopamine rush from like social media and
Yeah, very simple
and
validation.
going out and buying things and like tying into materialism? I mean, I think that's a big reason is because we start putting labels on things. Like, okay, so if I get this is gonna make me feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
How would it make you feel, may I ask? When you buy that thing that you're about to buy?
There's definitely a sense of gratification.
Okay, so gratification, so you feel gratitude? Okay. Do you have any good points about materialism?
Any good points?
Yes. The yin and the yang and the duality?
Well, I guess maybe that's a good thing because if it wasn't for materialism, we wouldn't know that the other side exists.
As far as elaborate on that?
As far as that we don't need it.
That we don't
Because
need
if
it.
materialism wasn't in existence, then we wouldn't know that we don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense,
As
I think
far
it's a
as the
good thing.
excess of it.
Yes,
So we need it to recognize that we don't need it.
exactly.
In a sense, yes.
That's cool. Anything to add, Nadim?
No, I think that was pretty good.
Alrighty. This has been a good 25 minutes. This is the Experience Podcast, episode number 1 with Nadim and Dennis Miller. Signing off. Bye.